The conference room smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. Margaret Chun sat across from two fraud investigators, her hands trembling as she pushed a manila folder toward them. Inside were photocopies of her father's signature on documents dated 6 months after his death. "I need you to understand," she said quietly. "My father was careful about everything. He would never have left things this way." The lead investigator, a woman named Detective Sarah Brennan, opened the folder without expression. What she saw there would eventually unravel 3 decades of family secrets, destroy 2 marriages, and send 1 person to prison. But that morning, it was just another inheritance dispute. Or so it seemed. Let me take you back to where this really began. Thomas Chung died on March 14th, 2 years ago. He was 73 years old, a semi-retired commercial real estate developer in Portland, Oregon. By all accounts, he'd built a comfortable life, not wealthy by billionaire standards, but solid. His estate was valued at approximately $4.2 million, including the family home in the West Hills, a small apartment complex he'd owned for 30 years, and various investment accounts. Thomas had been widowed for 8 years. His wife, Linda, had died of ovarian cancer in her early 60s, a loss that had gutted him, but never quite broken him. He'd stayed active, played golf twice a week, served on the board of a local charity. His children visited regularly, or at least that's what he told friends. He had 3 children. Margaret was the oldest at 47, an architect living in Seattle with her husband and 2 teenage daughters. She'd always been the responsible one, the one who called every Sunday, who remembered birthdays, who flew down when her father had his knee surgery. David was the middle child, 44, and lived just 20 minutes from Thomas in Lake Oswego. He worked in sales for a pharmaceutical company, drove a leased BMW, and had expensive tastes that never quite aligned with his income. He had a wife, Clarissa, and a son from a previous marriage who was away at college. And then there was Rachel. She was 39, the baby of the family, and she'd moved back into the family home 6 years earlier after a difficult divorce. She worked part-time as a yoga instructor and helped care for Thomas as he aged. Or that was the story everyone told. The family had gathered for Thomas's funeral on a cold, wet March afternoon. The service was dignified, well-attended. Thomas had been liked in his community. Margaret gave the eulogy. David shook hands and accepted condolences with the practiced ease of someone comfortable in social situations. Rachel sat in the front row, red-eyed, her hand resting on the empty seat beside her where her father should have been. After the burial, the family returned to the West Hills house, that sprawling mid-century modern Thomason Linda had bought in 1987. The view overlooked the city, and on clear days you could see Mount Hood in the distance. It had always been the family anchor, the place where Christmas happened, where grandchildren played in the yard. Thomas's lawyer, Gerald Whitman, had been the family attorney for 22 years. He was there that evening, a small man in his 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses, and the patient demeanor of someone who'd seen every possible family dynamic. He suggested they meet the following week to discuss the estate. "There's no rush," he'd said gently. "Take time to grieve first." But David had pressed. "We should probably get the basic framework, though, right? Just so everyone knows where things stand." Gerald had hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. The estate is relatively straightforward. Thomas updated his will about 14 months ago. That detail didn't register as significant at the time it sold up. They gathered in Thomas's study, a wood-paneled room lined with books he'd actually read. Margaret sat on the leather sofa, where she'd spent countless hours as a teenager, reading while her father worked at his desk. David took the armchair by the window. Rachel perched on the ottoman, her arms wrapped around herself. Gerald opened his briefcase and removed a bound document. Thomas was very clear about his wishes. The estate is to be divided equally among the 3 of you, with a few specific bequests. Relief seemed to settle over the room. Equal division. Fair. Simple. The house, Gerald continued, was to be given to Rachel, with the provision that if she chooses to sell it within 10 years, the proceeds would be split equally among all 3 siblings. This was Thomas's way of ensuring she had a stable home while still being fair to everyone. Margaret nodded. It made sense Rachel lived there. Rachel had been there, caring for him. The apartment building goes to David, under the same conditions. If sold within 10 years, proceeds are split 3 ways. David smiled for the first time since the funeral. The apartment building generated about $8,000 a month in rental income. It was a good asset, a stable asset, and Margaret, Gerald said, receives the investment portfolio. Approximately $1.3 million, along with a few specific items your father wanted you to have, including your mother's jewelry. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. Her mother's jewelry. She'd assumed it would be divided, maybe fought over, but her father had remembered. He'd known. There are a few smaller bequests, Gerald added. $10,000 to St. Vincent's Hospital, $5,000 to the Humane Society, some personal items distributed to friends, and there's a trust fund of $50,000 set aside for David's son, Michael, accessible when he turns 25 each Seamuth Fair. It seemed thoughtful. It seemed like exactly what Thomas June would have done, carefully balancing everyone's needs, trying to prevent conflict even in death. But then Gerald said something that should have been a warning. Now, there are some administrative matters to handle. Thomas had given Rachel power of attorney about 18 months ago, given her living situation and proximity. That ended with his death, of course, but she needed to work with me to transfer various accounts and close out anything that was in his name. David's expression shifted, just slightly. Power of attorney. I didn't know about that. It's quite common, Gerald said smoothly, when elderly parents have a child living with them. It often makes practical sense. Margaret felt something cold touch the back of her neck, though she couldn't have explained why. Her father had never mentioned giving Rachel power of attorney. But then, why would he? It was practical. Rachel was there. The meeting ended. They would need to file probate, which would take a few months. Gerald would handle everything. They should expect the estate to be settled within 6 to 8 months, barring complications. As they left the study, Margaret caught David's arm. "You okay?" He shrugged. "Sure. Yeah. Just didn't realize Rachel had been handling Dad's finances. She wasn't handling them," Margaret said. "She just had power of attorney for emergencies." "Right," David said, but he didn't sound convinced. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her father's will, about the careful divisions, about the fairness of it all. But something nagged at her. When had her father updated his will? 14 months ago. That would have been January of the previous year. She tried to remember if anything significant had happened around then. Any family event or crisis that would have prompted him to revisit his estate planning. She couldn't think of anything. 3 weeks after the funeral, Margaret drove down from Seattle to help Rachel start sorting through Thomas's belongings. It was a task she'd been dreading. Every drawer would hold memories, every closet a reminder. Rachel met her at the door. She looked thin, Margaret thought. Thinner than at the funeral. Her yoga instructor body had always been lean, but now she seemed almost fragile. "I haven't been able to touch his bedroom yet," Rachel admitted as they stood in the hallway. "I keep thinking he'll just come home." They worked together that Saturday, packing clothes for donation, sorting through papers, carefully wrapping the small objects that made up a life. Margaret found her father's college yearbook, his wedding album, a box of letters he'd saved from his own father. In the bottom drawer of Thomas's desk, she found his checkbook register. He'd always kept meticulous records, balancing to the penny. Margaret flipped through it idly, seeing the familiar handwriting, the careful notations. Then she stopped. There was a check written on February 2nd of the previous year, made out to cash for $15,000. The notation simply said family matter. $15,000 in cash. Margaret felt her heart rate pick up, though she wasn't sure why. People withdrew cash. It wasn't inherently suspicious. But $15,000. Her father had been careful about money. Strategic. He used credit cards for points, paid bills electronically. Large cash withdrawals weren't his style. She kept flipping. There were more. Not every month, but regularly. 10,000 in April, 20,000 in June, 8,000 in September. All made out to cash, all noted as family matter or personal. Over the course of 14 months, Thomas Chun had withdrawn nearly $200,000 in cash. Margaret sat back in the desk chair, the checkbook register in her hands. Where had $200,000 gone? Find something. Rachel's voice from the doorway made her jump. Margaret turned, holding up the register. Did Dad mention anything to you about needing cash? Large amounts. Rachel came closer, looked at the entries. Her face remained neutral. No. Why? He withdrew a lot over the past year. Almost 200,000. Rachel took the register, studied it. Huh? That's weird. Did he have any debts you knew about? Medical bills? Anything? No. I mean, he had the usual stuff. Property taxes, utilities, but nothing that would require cash. They looked at each other. Margaret saw something in her sister's eyes she couldn't quite read. Confusion, or something else. Maybe he was helping someone, Rachel suggested. You know how private he could be about money. If a friend was in trouble, or $200,000. Rachel, I don't know what to tell you. Meg, I lived here, but I didn't monitor his bank accounts. It was a reasonable response, a normal response. So why did Margaret feel like she'd just been warned off? She took the checkbook register home with her that night, along with several boxes of papers she'd volunteered to sort through. Gerald had said they'd need to compile all of Thomas's financial records for probate anyway. This would just be helping, but that wasn't why she took them. She took them because something felt wrong, and she couldn't name what it was. If you're following this story because you felt that same instinct about your own family, that sense that something is off beneath the surface, subscribing means you'll catch the next one when it drops. Back in Seattle, Margaret spent her evenings going through her father's papers, bank statements, investment reports, tax returns. She was an architect, not an accountant, but she understood numbers well enough. She created a spreadsheet, tracking income and expenses, building a picture of her father's financial life. The apartment building generated consistent rental income, deposited like clockwork on the first of each month. His investment dividends came quarterly. His pension from his years at a development firm arrived monthly. Everything was routine, predictable, except for the cash withdrawals. They'd started in January of the previous year and continued until 2 months before his death. The amounts varied but were always significant, and they were always noted vaguely. Family matter, personal, household. Margaret called David. He answered on the third ring, sounding distracted. Hey, what's up? Do you have copies of Dad's bank statements from the past couple years? Why would I have those? I just thought, since you live closer, maybe you'd helped him with anything financial. Rachel lived with him. If anyone was helping, it was her. Right, but he'd never mentioned anything to you about needing cash, large amounts. David was quiet for a moment. No. Why? What did you find? Margaret told him about the withdrawals. She heard him exhale slowly. That's a lot of money. I know. You think Rachel knows where it went? She says she doesn't. Another pause. Then, Meg, I've been thinking about the power of attorney thing. When exactly did Dad give her that? Gerald said about 18 months ago. Why? And when did he update his will? 14 months ago. Right around the same time the cash withdrawals started. Margaret felt something cold settle in her chest. What are you saying? I'm not saying anything. I'm just noticing a timeline. They were both silent. Then David said, Did Dad seem different to you that last year? When you visited? Margaret thought back. She'd visited in March for her father's birthday. He'd seemed fine, maybe a little tired. She'd come again in July, stayed for a weekend. He'd been sharp, engaged, told stories about his latest golf games. At Thanksgiving, he'd been quieter than usual, but he'd just had a cold. He seemed like himself, she said finally. Rachel was always there, though, at every visit. She lived there. But the numbers didn't lie. $200,000 had disappeared, and and Rachel had been the person closest to their father when it happened. The next morning, Margaret called Gerald Whitman. "I have some questions about the estate," she said carefully. "Nothing urgent, but I've been going through Dad's papers, and there are some things I'd like to understand better." Gerald agreed to meet her the following Tuesday at his office in downtown Portland. After they hung up, Margaret sat with her laptop open, staring at the spreadsheet. She was building a case against her own sister, and she felt sick about it. Margaret made an excuse to her husband about needing to check on the house, packed an overnight bag, and drove south. Gerald's office was on the 10th floor of an older building near Pioneer Courthouse Square. The waiting room had leather chairs and abstract art, the kind of studied professionalism meant to convey competence without ostentation. Gerald greeted her warmly, ushered her into his office. "How are you holding up? As well as can be expected. Thank you for seeing me." "Of course. What can I help clarify?" Margaret pulled out the copies of the bank statements she'd brought. "I've been organizing Dad's financial records, and I've found these cash withdrawals. Almost $200,000 over 14 months. Do you know anything about what they were for?" Gerald took the statements, put on his reading glasses, studied them carefully. His expression revealed nothing. "I wasn't aware of these," he said finally. "They're not reflected in any of our estate planning discussions. Could they have been gifts to one of us? If they were, they should have been documented. Gifts over $15,000 annually have tax implications." Margaret's hands felt cold. "So if these were gifts, and they weren't reported, that would be a problem. But we don't know that's what they were. What else could they be?" Gerald leaned back in his chair. "Margaret, I want to be careful here. There could be perfectly legitimate explanations. Your father could have been helping a friend, making home improvements in cash, any number of things. But you don't believe that." He met her eyes. "I believe we need more information before jumping to conclusions." Rachel had power of attorney. Yes, so she could have accessed his accounts. The power of attorney was limited. It allowed her to pay bills, handle routine transactions. It didn't give her unlimited access to liquidate assets or make large withdrawals. But she was there. She could have influenced him. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I've known your family for over 20 years. I knew your mother. Watched you kids grow up. I don't want to see this become adversarial. Neither do I. But $200,000 is missing, and I need to know where it went. And then let's find out, properly, through the probate process. If there are irregularities, they'll come to light." Margaret nodded, but she wasn't satisfied. The probate process would take months, and if Rachel had done something wrong, she'd have time to cover her tracks. That evening, Margaret drove to the West Hills house. She hadn't told Rachel she was coming. She wanted to see her sister's face when she asked about the money. Rachel answered the door in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair in a messy bun. She looked surprised to see Margaret. "Hey, I didn't know you were coming down. Last minute thing. Can we talk?" Something flickered across Rachel's face. Wariness. Fear. It was gone too quickly for Margaret to be sure. They sat in the living room, the space where they'd grown up, where their mother had decorated for Christmas every year, where family photos still lined the mantel. It felt wrong to have this conversation here, in this room full of good memories. "I've been going through Dad's bank statements." Margaret sighed. There was no point dancing around it. He withdrew almost $200,000 in cash over the past year and a half. Did you know about that? Rachel's face went very still. "No. You lived here. You had power of attorney, and you didn't notice $200,000 leaving his accounts. I wasn't monitoring every transaction, Meg. I paid the bills he asked me to pay. I didn't audit his finances. That much money doesn't just disappear." Rachel's expression hardened. "What are you accusing me of?" "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking if you know where the money went, and I'm telling you I don't." They stared at each other. Margaret saw anger in her sister's eyes, but also something else. Hurt, maybe, or guilt. Rachel, if you needed money, I didn't take anything from Dad. Rachel's voice was sharp now. I can't believe you'd even think that. Then help me understand what happened. I don't know what happened. Maybe Dad loaned money to someone. Maybe he paid off a debt. Maybe he buried it in the backyard. I don't know. Rachel stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. You know what? Ever since the will was read, I've felt you and David judging me. Like I somehow manipulated Dad into leaving me the house. Like I was using him. Nobody said that. You didn't have to. Primera, ca, en, fil italiano. The responsible older sister and the successful son. And poor Rachel, who couldn't get her life together, who had to move back home like a failure. Her voice cracked. I took care of him, Meg, for 6 years. I was here when he was lonely, when he was sad about Mom, when he couldn't sleep at night because his knee hurt. I cooked his meals and drove him to appointments and listened to the same stories over and over. Where were you? You called on Sundays. Big deal. Big deal. The words hit Margaret like a slap because they were partly true. She'd been busy with her own life, her career, her family. She'd loved her father, but Rachel had been the one who showed up daily. I'm sorry, Margaret said quietly. You're right. You were here, and I'm grateful for that. But Rachel, this money, I don't know where it is. Rachel's face was flushed, her eyes bright with tears. I swear to you, I don't know, but I'm not going to keep defending myself to you. If you think I stole from Dad, then do whatever you need to do. Talk to Reld. Hire an investigator. I don't care, but get out of my house. Rachel, it's my house now. Meg, Dad left it to me, so unless you have something else to say, I'd like you to leave. Margaret left. She sat in her car outside the house for 10 minutes, hands shaking, trying to decide what to do next. Rachel's anger had seemed genuine. Her hurt had seemed real, but that didn't mean she was innocent. Margaret called David from the car. She claims she doesn't know anything about the money, Margaret told him, but she also just kicked me out of the house. So she's defensive. That's not exactly proof of innocence. It's not proof of guilt either. What do you want to do? Margaret closed her eyes. I think we need to hire a forensic accountant, someone who can trace where that money actually went. That's going to get expensive and ugly. I know. Do it, David said. I'll split the cost with you. We need to know. The forensic accountant was a woman named Julia Patterson, who came highly recommended by an attorney Margaret knew from work. Julia was in her 50s, precise, thorough, the kind of person who saw patterns where others saw chaos. Margaret and David met with her in her office in downtown Portland, bringing every financial document they'd been able to gather. Julia listened to their concerns without judgment, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. What I'm going to do, she explained, is construct a complete financial picture of your father's last 2 years. Every transaction, every account, every movement of money. If there are irregularities, they'll show up. How long will it take? David asked. 4 to 6 weeks for a preliminary report. Longer if we need to dig deeper. And if you find evidence that someone was stealing. Julia met his eyes. Then you'll need to decide what you want to do with that information. File a civil suit, report it to the authorities, or handle it within the family. That's not my call. They authorized her to begin work. The retainer was $10,000. Margaret paid half. David paid half. They didn't tell Rachel. For the next month, Margaret tried to focus on her regular life. Her architectural firm was in the middle of a large commercial project. Her daughters had school events, soccer games, drama rehearsals. But every night, she found herself thinking about her father, about the missing money, about Rachel's face when she'd asked her to leave. She'd broken something between them that night. She knew it, and she didn't know how to fix it. David called every few days, asking if Julia had found anything yet. He was becoming obsessed with it, Margaret thought, or maybe they both were. 5 weeks after hiring Julia, Margaret got a call. I have preliminary findings, Julia said. Can you and your brother come to my office tomorrow? They met at 2 in the afternoon. Julia had a thick folder waiting for them, full of printouts and highlighted sections, and sticky notes marking key pages. Your father's finances were very organized, Julia began, which makes the irregularities stand out even more clearly. She spread several documents across the conference table. The cash withdrawals you identified are only part of the picture. Over the 18 months before his death, approximately $320,000 left your father's various accounts in ways that don't match his historical patterns. Margaret felt her stomach drop. 320,000, not 200. More than she'd thought. Some was cash withdrawals, but there were also electronic transfers to accounts that appear to be personal accounts belonging to your sister Rachel. David leaned forward. Show me. Julia pointed to a series of highlighted entries. These transfers were coded as loan repayment or family assistance. They ranged from $5,000 to $15,000 and occurred approximately every 6 to 8 weeks. Rachel said she didn't take any money, Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. According to these records, she received approximately $130,000 in direct transfers, Julia said. The remaining funds are more difficult to trace. Some appear to have been withdrawn as cash and never deposited anywhere I can find. Some went to accounts I haven't been able to identify yet. Could Dad have been giving her that money? Margaret asked. As gifts? That's possible. But if they were gifts, they should have been reported to the IRS. Gifts over $15,000 annually trigger reporting requirements. These weren't reported. David's face had gone red. Say, led to us. She looked you in the eye and said she didn't take anything, and she lied. We don't know the full context yet, Julia. There may be explanations. What kind of explanation justifies taking $130,000 and not telling anyone? Julia pulled out another document. There's something else. The will you were shown, dated 14 months before your father's death. It's the most recent version on file with the attorney, but I found evidence of an earlier will in your father's safe deposit box records. Margaret's heart was pounding now. An earlier will. It was drafted 7 years ago, shortly after your mother died. In that version, the estate was divided equally among all 3 children, with no special provisions for the house or the apartment building. Everything was to be liquidated and split 3 ways. So Dad changed his mind, David said. He decided to give Rachel the house instead. Yes, but the timing is notable. The will was changed 14 months ago. The power of attorney was granted 18 months ago, and the unusual financial transactions started around the same time. The implications hung in the air between them. Margaret heard herself ask, "Are you saying Rachel influenced Dad to change his will?" "I'm saying the timeline is suspicious," Julia said carefully. "Whether that constitutes undue influence is a legal question, not a financial one. But, yes, the pattern suggests someone had increasing control over your father's finances and estate planning during the final 18 months of his life." David stood up, paced to the window. "We need to talk to Gerald. This has to void the will, right? If she was manipulating him." "Not necessarily," Julia said. "You'd need to prove undue influence, which is difficult. Your father wasn't declared incompetent. There's no evidence of dementia or diminished capacity. He was apparently acting of his own free will, while his daughter was taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from him, which may have been with his knowledge and consent. I'm not defending it. I'm telling you what a court would look at." Margaret felt like the room was tilting. Her baby sister, the one she'd protected from bullies in school, who she'd taught to ride a bike, who'd cried in her arms after her divorce. That sister had stolen from their father, had manipulated him, had lied to both of them without hesitation. Or had she? "I need to talk to Rachel." Gotta get it side. Before we do anything else, I need to hear her side. "Meg, She's just going to lie again, David said. Maybe. But I need to hear it. Margaret drove to the West Hills house that evening, unannounced again. This time, Rachel didn't answer the door. Her car was in the driveway, but the house was dark. Margaret knocked, rang the doorbell, called Rachel's cell phone. Nothing. She was about to leave when she saw movement in one of the upstairs windows. Rachel's bedroom. The curtain had shifted. "Rachel," Margaret called up. "I know you're there. We need to talk." No response. "I hired a forensic accountant. I know about the money. I know about the transfers." The front door opened. Rachel stood there, and Margaret barely recognized her. She'd lost more weight. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow. "Come in," Rachel said quietly. They sat in the kitchen. This time, Rachel made tea. Neither of them touched. "Why did you lie to me?" Margaret asked. Rachel stared at the table. "Because I knew how it would look." How it would look. "Rachel, you took over $100,000 from Dad and didn't tell anyone. How else is it supposed to look? He gave it to me." Rachel's voice was flat. "I didn't steal it. He gave it to me because I needed it." "Why did you need it?" Rachel finally looked up, and Margaret saw something raw and painful in her sister's face. "Because I was broke. Because my ex-husband destroyed my credit in the divorce. Because I had debt collectors calling every day. Because I couldn't afford to live anywhere else. And Dad offered to help." $130,000, Rachel. That's not help. That's I. Know what it is? Rachel's voice broke. "I know, okay? I know it was too much. I know I should have said no. But I was desperate, and he insisted, and I told myself I'd pay him back someday. And then he died, and now everyone thinks I'm some kind of thief." Margaret felt her anger waver. "Did you ask him to change the will? To give you the house?" "No. That was his idea. He said he wanted to make sure I was taken care of because I'd been there for him. He said David had his career and you had your practice, and I had nothing. So this was his way of balancing things out." "But it's not balanced, Rachel. You got the house plus $130,000. The house has a mortgage. Did you know that? Dad refinanced it. 2 years ago, I owe almost $400,000 on it. Margaret hadn't known that. The house had been paid off when their mother died. Why would Thomas refinance? Where did that money go?" Rachel laughed, a broken sound. "Where do you think? To me? I needed money for the divorce attorney, for my debt, for everything. Dad wanted to help, but he didn't have that much liquid cash, so he refinanced the house. The full picture was starting to come together, and it was worse than Margaret had imagined. Not because Rachel had stolen, but because their father had systematically depleted his estate to keep Rachel afloat, and in doing so, had created this entire nightmare. Why didn't you just tell us this from the beginning?" "Because I was ashamed." Tears were running down Rachel's face now. "Because I'm 40 years old, and my father had to bail me out financially like I was a teenager. Because you and David had your lives together and I was the family failure. Because I didn't want you to know how pathetic I am." Margaret reached across the table, took her sister's hand. "You're not pathetic." "Yes, I am. And now you're probably going to sue me or report me or something, and I'll lose the house too, and I'll have nothing left." "Rachel, I'm not going to sue you." "David will." Margaret didn't contradict her, because she suspected Rachel was right. When Margaret told David what Rachel had admitted, his response was immediate. "We need to contest the will. This is textbook undue influence." She didn't force him to do anything. She was a financial drain on him for years, and she knew it. She isolated him, made herself indispensable, and convinced him to restructure his entire estate around her needs. That's manipulation, Meg. Or it's a father helping his child at the expense of his other children. What about Usay? What about being fair to everyone? Margaret didn't have an answer to that. Over the next 2 weeks, the family civil war escalated. David hired an attorney specializing in estate litigation. The attorney filed a petition to contest the will based on undue influence and lack of capacity. They would argue that Thomas Chun had been unduly influenced by Rachel, who had isolated him and manipulated him during a period of vulnerability. Rachel hired her own attorney, paid for with what little savings she had left. Her attorney argued that Thomas had been of sound mind, that he'd had independent legal counsel when he updated his will, and that his decisions reflected his own wishes, not manipulation. The battle was bitter, public, and expensive. Margaret found herself caught in the middle, pressured by David to support the contest, pleaded with by Rachel to defend her. She spoke to both of them and satisfied neither. During a particularly heated phone call, David said, "Whose side are you on, Meg? There shouldn't be sides. We're family." Rachel stopped being family when she decided her needs mattered more than anyone else's. David, she was struggling. Dad helped her, maybe too much, but that was his choice. It was his choice because she manipulated him into making it. Margaret hung up, exhausted. The probate process ground to a halt, while the will contests played out. Gerald Whitman tried to mediate, suggesting they settle out of court, divide things differently, find a compromise. But David wouldn't compromise. He wanted the will thrown out, wanted everything divided equally, per the older will, wanted Rachel to repay every penny she'd received. Rachel, meanwhile, was falling apart. Margaret went to visit her one Saturday and found the house in disarray. Rachel in the same clothes she'd been wearing days earlier. "I can't do this anymore," Rachel said. "I can't fight both of you. I can't afford the legal fees. I'm just going to give up the house." "Don't do that. We'll figure this out." "How?" "David hates me. You're probably going to side with him eventually because he's right. I did take too much money. I did let Dad sacrifice his estate for me. I'm exactly the selfish person he thinks I am." Margaret spent the night there, making sure Rachel ate something, trying to convince her that things would work out, but she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Then Julia Patterson called with new information. "I've been continuing to trace the financial transactions," she said, "and I found something you need to know about." Margaret met her the next morning. Julia had more printouts, more highlighted sections, the cash withdrawals I couldn't account for. I found where at least some of them went. She showed Margaret a series of checks, photographed from deposit records. The checks were made out to David Chun. 20,000 in March, 15,000 in July, 10,000 in November, another 20. In February, $65,000 to David. Margaret stared at the images. David told me he didn't receive any money from Dad. According to these records, he did. The checks are in your father's handwriting, deposited into an account belonging to your brother. Why would David lie about that? I don't know, but I thought you should know before this goes any further. Margaret confronted David that afternoon, showing up at his Lake Oswego house without warning. His wife, Clarissa, answered the door, looking surprised. "Is David home?" "He's in his office." "Is everything okay? I need to talk to him." David came out of his home office, looking annoyed until he saw Margaret's face. "What's wrong?" She held up the printouts. "You told me you didn't receive any money from Dad." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I didn't." Then explained these checks. $65,000. David. "Why did you lie?" He glanced toward the kitchen where Clarissa was, then gestured for Margaret to follow him outside. They stood on the back deck, the manicured yard stretching below them. "It was loans," he said finally. "Dad loaned me money for Michael's college tuition, for some business investments. I was going to pay him back." "You were going to pay him back, like Rachel was going to pay him back." "It's not the same thing." "Why? Because you're better at hiding it?" David's face flushed. "I wasn't hiding anything. Dad and I had an agreement. Those were legitimate loans. Then why didn't you tell me when I asked if Dad had given you money?" "Because it wasn't relevant. You were asking about gifts, about suspicious activity. These were business transactions." "Did you have loan documents?" promissory notes, anything in writing. The silence was her answer. You took $65,000 from Dad with no documentation, no legal loan agreement, nothing. And then you hired an attorney to go after Rachel for doing the exact same thing. She took twice as much as I did. So this is about amounts, about who took more. David, you're suing her for undue influence while you were doing the same thing. I wasn't living in his house, making myself indispensable, influencing his will. No, you were just taking his money and lying about it. How's that better? They stood there, brother and sister, looking at each other like strangers. Are you going to tell Rachel? David asked quietly. I don't know. I'm still trying to process that both of you lied to me. I'm not dropping the will contest. Even knowing what you took, Rachel still got more. She still manipulated him into changing the will. That part hasn't changed. Margaret left without another word. That night, she sat in her home office, looking at her father's photograph on her desk. He was smiling in the picture, standing in front of the West Hills house, one arm around her mother. They'd been happy then. The family had been whole. How had it come to this? She thought about her father's choices in those final years, helping Rachel when she was desperate, lending David money for his son's education, trying to take care of all of them in different ways. Had he known what it would lead to? Had he anticipated that his generosity would tear them apart? Or had he simply been trying to help his children, unaware that help could sometimes be poison? Margaret made a decision. She called Rachel. I need to tell you something, she said, and then we need to talk about how to end this. She told Rachel about David's loans. She heard her sister's sharp intake of breath. So he's been lying this whole time, Rachel said, acting all righteous. Well, he was doing the same thing. Not the same thing. He took less money, and he didn't live with Dad or have power of attorney. But yes, he was lying. What are you going to do? I'm going to tell his attorney, and then I'm going to suggest we all sit down, without lawyers, and figure this out. Meg David's not going to settle. He wants me destroyed. He wants the money he thinks you took. Maybe if we show him he's not blameless, he'll be more reasonable. You don't know him like I do. He's not going to back down. But Rachel was wrong. When David's attorney learned about the $65,000 in undocumented loans, he strongly advised David to settle. If this came out in court, it would undermine their entire case. A plaintiff claiming undue influence while having secretly received money himself would look terrible to a judge. Gerald Whitman arranged a meeting. All three siblings, both attorneys, and Gerald himself sat in his conference room on a Tuesday afternoon in August, nearly 6 months after Thomas Chune's death. The settlement took 3 hours to negotiate. In the end, they agreed that Rachel would keep the house, but would pay David and Margaret each $60,000 from her share of the estate, representing a portion of the money she'd received over the years. The payments would be made from the eventual sale of the house or from refinancing if she chose to stay. David would forgive the loans their father had given him, acknowledging they were not legitimate business transactions, but family assistance. Those amounts would be deducted from his share of the estate. Margaret, who had received the investment portfolio and had not taken any additional money during Thomas's life, would keep her full share. The apartment building would be sold, and the proceeds would be divided according to the adjusted calculation. No one was happy, but everyone agreed. The legal fees had cost them all tens of thousands of dollars. The emotional cost was incalculable. As they filed out of Gerald's office, Margaret tried to speak to Rachel. Her sister brushed past without making eye contact. Give her time, Gerald said quietly. Families heal. Eventually. But Margaret wondered if that was true. 3 months later, the estate was finally settled. The probate closed. The assets were distributed according to the settlement agreement. Margaret never got the full story of what had happened in their father's final years. She had fragments, financial records, contradictory accounts from her siblings, but she never got to ask Thomas himself why he'd made the choices he'd made. She found one more piece of the puzzle, though, while doing a final sweep of the house before Rachel put it on the market. In a box in the attic, she found a letter. It was in her father's handwriting, addressed to all three of them. but never mailed. It was dated 2 months before his death. "My dear children," it began, "I know my estate planning may seem unfair to some of you. I want to explain why I've made the choices I've made, even though I suspect you'll disagree with them." Rachel needed help. Not wanted it, needed it. Her divorce left her in a terrible financial position, and I couldn't stand by and watch her struggle when I had the means to help. Yes, I gave her a lot of money. Yes, I'm leaving her the house, but she's given me something invaluable in return. Her time, her companionship, her care. She's been here through the loneliest period of my life, after losing your mother. That has value too. David, I loaned you money for Michael's education because I believe in investing in the next generation. I never expected repayment, though I know you intended to pay me back. Consider it a grandfather's gift to his grandson. Margaret, you've been the rock of this family. Responsible, successful, always making the right choices. I know you'll be fine whatever I leave you. That's not an insult. It's a compliment and a relief. I hope you three can understand that being fair doesn't always mean being equal. I've tried to give each of you what you needed, not what you deserved. Maybe that was a mistake, but it was done with love. Please don't let money destroy what matters. Please remember your family. The letter was signed, Dad, in his careful handwriting. Margaret read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she called David and Rachel. "I found something," she said. "Something you both need to see." They met at the house one final time, the 3 of them. Rachel had been packing, and the rooms were full of boxers, the walls bare of photographs. Margaret read the letter aloud. When she finished, no one spoke for a long moment. Then Rachel said, her voice thick with tears, "He was trying to help. All he wanted was to help us, and we turned it into this." "We didn't know," David said quietly. "If he'd just explained, would it have mattered?" Margaret asked. "Would we have accepted it, or would we have fought anyway?" They sat together in the living room where they'd grown up. 3 middle-aged adults crying for their father and for the family they used to be. The house sold 3 months later for $1.4 million. After paying off the mortgage and dividing the proceeds according to the settlement, Rachel cleared about $600,000. She bought a small condo in southeast Portland and used some of the money to pay off her remaining debts. David's share from the apartment building and his portion of the house sale came to about $700,000 after legal fees. He put most of it into retirement accounts and a college fund for Michael. Margaret's investment portfolio had grown slightly during the probate process. With the proceeds from the house sale, her total inheritance came to about $1.5 million. On paper, it looked like their father had been fair. The amounts weren't equal, but they were close enough. But the real cost couldn't be measured in dollars. David and Rachel haven't spoken in over a year. David's wife sends Christmas cards, but Rachel doesn't respond. Margaret talks to both of them, separately, but family gatherings no longer exist. There's no Thanksgiving dinner, no Christmas morning, no birthday celebrations together. Margaret's daughters ask sometimes about their Aunt Rachel, their Uncle David. Margaret doesn't know how to explain what happened in a way that makes sense. How do you tell your children that money can destroy love, that fairness and equality aren't the same thing, that sometimes trying to help can cause the most damage? The inheritance is settled. The criminal investigation that Margaret initiated when she first saw those suspicious signatures, it was quietly closed after the forensic accountant's report showed the transactions, while unusual, weren't fraudulent. The signatures were real. Thomas June had authorized everything. He'd known what he was doing, even if no one else understood. But the family remains broken. Margaret thinks about her father's letter sometimes, about his hope that they wouldn't let money destroy what mattered. But the damage was done before they ever read those words. Maybe it was inevitable. Maybe the moment Thomas decided to help one child more than the others, this outcome was written. Or maybe they could have chosen differently, could have communicated better, trusted more, fought less, could have honored what their father actually wanted instead of what they thought was fair. Margaret will never know. What she does know is that she has $1.5 million, a successful career, a good marriage, healthy children, and no relationship with a brother or sister. The inheritance was supposed to be her father's final gift, his way of providing for them after he was gone. Instead, it's the thing that took away the only gift that actually mattered: each other. On the anniversary of Thomas Chun's death, Margaret drives to the cemetery alone. She stands at his grave, looking at the headstone, and tries to find words. An apology, maybe, or an explanation. But nothing comes. "I'm sorry, Dad," she finally says. "We tried. We really did. But we couldn't get past it. The money, the secrets, all of it. I know that's not what you wanted. The stone offers no absolution, no wisdom, no peace." Margaret places flowers on the grave and drives away. Behind her, the inheritance dispute is officially over, but its aftermath will echo through the rest of their lives. A permanent reminder that some inheritances aren't money or property at all. They're the wounds we carry, the relationships we lose, and the family we can never quite get back. The case is closed. The family is not.